Why does Superman have an illegitimate child? Why is Batman running around with a gorilla? If you want to know the answer, you'll have to watch this video. It's about censorship, drugs, and the creativity of humans. This might be a long video, so sit down, grab a snack, and let's jump in. In the 50s, there weren't any comic stores. Instead, you would get comics from newspaper stands, drugstores, and supermarkets. Comics were everywhere, and if they were everywhere, they would need to stand out from each other. So, comic publishers decided to make them stand out by making them as weird as possible. DC had some strange ideas on what would make comics sell better, like having gorillas on the cover, someone talking to the reader, and the color purple. In fact, they put so many gorillas in comics that there was a monthly limit on them at DC. This concept did work, as Superman comics at the time sold so well that DC dubbed itself as the Superman Company, and Batman and Superman comics sold better than they ever did, including now. In the Silver Age of comics, many writers wrote multiple books each month. One of the most well known authors to do this was Stan Lee. It is doubtable on how much Stan Lee actually wrote, as he would send the artist an idea for a story. The artist would draw a full story, and then he would write around their art. Even though Stan didn't do a lot of the story, he would still have to make like 20 new villains and new stories each month. So anytime there's a villain like the Impossible Man or Egghead, or a story where there's some giant alien tree. In another series, you'd get a story like Amazing Spider Man 33, showing how great the character was. But also, since there was no big continuity for which an author would have to respect, and comics were considered as a medium for children, writers could write whatever they felt like. Spider Man, one of the most popular comic heroes ever, came from looking at a fly on a wall. And the Fantastic Four was a magazine started because Stan Lee didn't want to work at Marvel anymore, as it had gotten boring for him. He wrote the Fantastic Four so he could get fired from his company, but when people loved it, he started writing more. I don't want to knock all the artists and writers from this time by saying their work was caused by drug use, but honestly, it's tough to believe that some of these stories could exist without the influence of any substances. A lot of writers, like Grant Morrison, have admitted to using drugs, and it's likely that creators from the 70s, like Jim Starlin, were either tripping on something or inspired by those experiences. This is the most likely reason for the strangeness of comics back in the day, and it's a very long story. As I had mentioned in a previous segment, comics used to be sold everywhere, and not every comic was about superheroes. There were comics about romance, horror, and westerns. This led to comics' mass appeal, with everyone from babies to presidents of companies reading them. Except that was all ruined by this German prick. This man was named Frederick Wertham, a German American psychiatrist. Now, Frederick was actually not that bad of a person. His findings helped overturn some laws about segregation, and he was all around a pretty good guy. But one day, when he was treating some juvenile delinquents, he found that they were reading comics. This wasn't an uncommon sight at the time, but he made the very stupid connection that if juvenile delinquents read comics, that must be why they're delinquents. He began reading more comics and saw a depiction of crimes that Batman and his adoptive son, Robin, sleeping in the same bed made them gay, and that Superman was un American and fascist. Yes, the same Superman that stands for truth and justice for all and is inspired by immigrants was un American. This book and Senate hearings led to the creation of the Comics Code Authority. These rules were not created or enforced by the government, but instead by the comics publishers. These new rules stated that you couldn't have horror like elements, good had to triumph over evil, and many other stupid rules. This led to some of the most popular comic genres to completely stop being published. However, one genre was able to weather the storm: superheroes. However, they were not completely unaffected. Due, Due to this new censorship hindering the writing of creators, comics got weirder. However, this wouldn't stick around forever. The biggest change in this period started in 1970 when the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare came to Marvel and asked them to make a story against drug abuse. Although this was against the comics code, Marvel ended up publishing their story, resulting in issues 96 to 98 of The Amazing Spider Man. Not to be outdone, DC published Green Lantern issue 85, an issue where Green Arrow's sidekick becomes a heroin addict. These issues led to the Comics Code revising their rules, which would lead to comics getting darker in the years that followed. Comic stores also started popping up across America, which meant publishers could sell directly to them. The Comics Code stamp was kept on the cover, but it was more of a formality, and issues would sometimes be published without the stamp. In the early 2000s, Marvel moved away from the Comics Code, and around 10 years later, so did DC, both opting for their own age ratings. I made this video not to make fun of these comics, but to inform people about them. Anytime this period is shown in media, its creations are portrayed as stupid and silly, relics of a bygone era. But they can be so much more. And that's why one of my favorite writers is Grant Morrison. They take Silver Age characters like Animal Man and the Doom Patrol and completely retool them. And isn't that what comics are all about? Aren't comics just one big game of yes and told over centuries? Sure, not every comic is good, but that doesn't mean we should think they're all weird. Sure, you may not like them, and not every story from this period is like the Mona Lisa of comics, but they could be. All this goes back to my point of yes anding. I'm sure Batman or Superman were thought of as dumb and silly at the time, but the writers didn't give up. They kept going. And that's why we call those old stories weird, because they were given up on. They weren't innovated or changed. After one story, they were just dropped. And instead of thinking these are just weird comics that can never be changed, be like Grant Morrison. Think of how you can change them. You could just change a comic and change an old story to be updated, or you could change the world.